It's 8:30.
Thank you, Sherry. Call to order the meeting, Planning and Zoning on October 12th. Sherry, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Delange?
Here.
Mr. Horian?
Here.
Ms. Portofori?
Yes, here.
Mr. Schmitz?
Yes.
Mr. Lilly?
Yes.
And we have our alternates, Mr. Rambrzuski
Here.
and Ms. Here.
We'd like to welcome Ms. Root here as our alternate. She gracefully decided to volunteer her time for us, so glad to have you as an alternate. Thank you. Next is minutes, planning and zoning minutes of September 13. If everybody's read them and no comments, could we have a motion to approve?
I make a motion. Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Okay, we have a continued item from the prior meeting, a development agreement amendment application for 3833 Cardinal Boulevard. Stuart.
Good morning, board members. For the record, my name is Stuart Cruz, city planner with the city of Daytona Beach Shores. This particular item is DA 120210029, which is a development agreement amendment, Especially residence, and if it were approved by the city, it would be the second amendment to the Atlantic Avenues Estates LLC development agreement. As you may recall, board members, the development agreement between the city of Daytona Beach Shores and Atlantic Avenue Estates LLC concerns the property. It's about 0.7 of an acre, and it's located in the 3800 block west side of South Atlantic Avenue, just across from the Blue Surf condo. The property was subdivided into 4 lots, and all 4 lots have been sold. And this particular property that is subject to the development agreement amendment is located at 3833 Cardinal Boulevard. So it's on the west side of the subdivision. It's actually on the northwest side, on the Cardinal side of the subdivision. The property owner applicant is Cheryl and Anthony Espesi, who own the property, and it's just about 0.1 acre of an acre. There are currently entitlements at different layers, and typically we don't see this for a single-family property here at Daytona Beach Shores, but basically they're allowed to have either a duplex or a single-family residence, and in this case, the owners are applying to have a single-family residence there with some deviations. So the development agreement and the amendment that concerns the overall subdivision essentially has some development standards, and when it comes to single-family development, it references, the development agreement references the development standards that are in the RSF2, which is this urban single-family residential detached district, and so it has its own setbacks and whatnot. What the applicant and owners are applying for in this case is to allow the property to be developed under the following dimensional requirements, which would be for a minimum front yard of 25 feet set off from the road, and the rear setback of 10 feet set off from the rear property line, and maximum lot coverage of 39%. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. So the substantive change, if it was adopted by the city, you can see this is a copy and paste, and it's highlighted here, and essentially what it says is what I said exactly. If these development standards were to be approved by the city, it would relate only to this particular property. So the other 3 lots would not be able to develop under these same standards. They would have to develop under the existing standards of development agreement and the RSF2 zoning district. So again, as I mentioned, minimum front yard setback of 25 feet, rear yard setback of 10 feet, and a maximum lot coverage of 39%, and all other development standards would apply. So this is just a table, a quick summary table of the substantive change, as I mentioned earlier. If you look at the second from the bottom row, the middle column, you'll see the existing front yard, rear yard, and lot cover requirements by the code and the development agreement. So the difference in terms of front yard setback would be 5 feet, rear yard setback would be 15 feet, and lot coverage would be 4%. So in terms of the overall development goal that was envisioned by the city and the developer, in terms of having that vacant property that was annexed from the county into Daytona Beach Shores being developed into something, that development goal does not change. All the other requirements of the development agreement are not changed. So in terms of the public benefits, the public interest, nothing has changed whatsoever. And you'll see all that outlined in your staff report, board members. So just real quickly, I'm not going to go over all the requirements, but what I can say in terms of the land development code requirements, this is a legislative process. And so, John, our city attorney can always speak to this, but essentially this is at, the will of the city council. So there's no real, legal test per se in terms of approving this, kind of like what you see with a variance. This is totally, up to the city council. Obviously, the board is going to provide a recommendation as well, but it has to be at the consent of all the property owners. So originally it was just one property owner, now it's 4 property owners. All 4 property owners have signed on to it. Actually, last night, I can't remember the time, it was maybe about 8 or 9. We got the last signature, the signature from the last property, the property that actually transferred ownership last month. You may recall this is a continued item, and at that time we hadn't had all the signatures from all the property owners within the subdivision. So despite all the property owners in the subdivision signing on to this, the city council still have the ability to say yay or nay. So what staff did in terms of a planning analysis, staff looked at the properties to the north and to the south of this particular property. We went all the way to Amelia, and what we saw was that if you look at the table, you'll see averages, and in your staff report, you see those averages as well. In terms of the requested deviation of 25 feet for the front yard is within range. You'll see that to the north, the average front yard setback is 27.7 feet, and to the south, it's 23 feet. To the rear now, it is outside of range. You can see that to the north is 28.7 feet for the rear yard setback, the average for the lots, and then to the south is 27.7 feet. However, staff does note that if this covered patio was detached from the building, it would be considered as an accessory structure. And if it was considered an accessory structure, it could actually go up to 5 feet from the property line, kind of like a shed or a detached parking garage or even a pool structure. All those things, they're considered accessory structures, and those could actually go under the code up to 5 feet from the rear property line. So I just wanted to mention that. And in terms of lot coverage, you'll see the average between the north and the south. The deviation is within that, but to the high end of 39%. So in terms of due public notice, comprehensive plan consistency, and code requirements, all those things in staff's opinion, have been met. The due public notice actually is a fact. That was provided, and an affidavit was submitted to the city, and it's on the record. So this is the property, as I mentioned earlier. To the right, you'll see the Blue Surf condo, and then in between that road is obviously South Atlantic, and then you see the subdivision there. The lot in question is, as I mentioned earlier, to the northwest corner on the Atlantic side. And as you can see, all the lots are currently undeveloped. And this is a street view from Cardinal Boulevard of what that particular lot looks like, based on Google Maps 2019. And this is a plan of what the development would look like. So the blue sort of triangle is the building footprint. The green to the right of the blue is the covered patio, and you'd see that would be 10 feet from the property line. And then the front yard setback would be 25 feet. And of course, the lot coverage would be 39%. So if this is approved by the city, actually it's on the city council's agenda tonight. So your recommendation will be heard by the city council. And the reason for that is there was a timing issue with the notices that went out, and having both items continued, it ended up on tonight's agenda. If it is approved by the city council, there would be a second read on October 26th, and thereafter the applicant would be able to apply for permits with the city and obviously build thereafter. If there's any questions for staff, I'll be happy to take those. Staff is recommending approval as presented. And of course, the property owners are here. They drove all the way from outside of Orlando to be here. Then they got to drive back, and then they'll come back again tonight for the meet.
Maybe they should just stay in town all day. I had a question, Stuart.
Sir.
Under the synopsis, it says that they are also requesting that the city waive the $550 development application fee. And then I don't see that mentioned anywhere else in the rest of the stuff.
Yes, so that is something that the city council can do, or the city manager can do. I didn't really get into that too much. I don't know necessarily, John, if we need a recommendation from the planning and zoning board on that, for waiving the fee.
No, but it would be at their discretion to do so if they wanted to, but that's not really the part of this that they're reviewing.
Okay.
Okay, well, I was just curious because it was under the synopsis, and couldn't find it anywhere else in the rest of it. Do we have any other discussion?
I have a quick question. Is there any way you can go back? I just wanted confirmation on that drawing right there.
Yes, sir.
So the house itself is how many feet away from the back?
So the primary building footprint is actually 20.8 feet back. But with the covered patio, it ends up being 10 feet from the rear.
All right, I needed that confirmation, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Has the fire department signed off on this?
The fire department did not review this application. Typically, the fire department doesn't review single-family development.
Well, we're starting to get closer to the site, and you know as well as I do that the next property owner's going to come in and ask for basically the same thing, if not more.
That's correct.
So, you know, we're caught like we were a couple weeks ago, at houses 5 feet apart from each other.
Yeah, so one thing I can say is that the building department, when they review these site plans, you know, they have a similar code as the fire department, and they're very, you know, I don't want to say they're you know, 100% familiar with the fire department regulations, but if there is something that comes up in terms of a question or a concern, they typically route the application, the building permit application, and the plans to the fire department for their approval as well. So typically, that would be addressed through fire construction materials. You know, so if there's any wood that's there, it would have to be treated and rated so as to, you know, not create an issue in terms of public safety.
Thanks, sir.
No problem.
Any other questions from the board? Anyone wish to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve development agreement amendment application DA 1202-1029 SPZ Residence Atlantic Avenue Estates LLC 3833 Cardinal Boulevard.
I'll second.
Second. Sherry, would you call the roll?
Which one of you gentlemen will?
Which one was blamed?
Ms. Sartori?
Yes.
Mr. Horian?
Yes.
Mr. Lilly?
You me?
Mr. Lilly?
Yes.
Mr. Schmitz?
Yes.
Mr. Plummer?
Yes.
Okay, our next item is ordinance 2021-14. Mr. Carey, Attorney Carey, would you read the ordinance for us, please?
This is ordinance 2021-11 is what we're doing, right?
Yes.
Okay. An ordinance of the city of
Oh,
Daytona.
dash 14, I'm sorry.
Page 14.
14. Okay.
That's on the page two.
Do you know what page it is in the packet, Sarah?
34 of 94.
34? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Wrong one. All right, this is ordinance 2021-14. An ordinance of the city of Daytona Beach, Florida, amending mobile food business, amending the code of ordinances, Appendix B, Land Development Code, by amending Chapter 2 entitled Definitions to provide for a definition of mobile food vehicle, amending Chapter 14 entitled Zoning Regulations, provide for mobile food vehicles on certain properties within city limits, providing for enforcement penalties, providing for safety provisions, providing for compensation, providing for conflicting ordinances, providing for severability, and providing for effective date.
Thank you. And Stuart is up again.
I'm sweating here. Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members again. Stuart Cruz, city planner with the city of Daytona Beach Shores for the record. This ordinance 2021-14 is entitled Mobile Food Vehicles. And the purpose behind this, board members, as you may have seen in your staff report, is to create mobile food vehicle regulations that would regulate and govern the location and operation of these vehicles within the city. Currently, the city has no regulations. It actually prohibits it by default in terms of its prohibition of outdoor activities and uses regulations in the city's land development code. So the reason why we're here today, there's two reasons actually, is in 2010, last year, the state legislature and the governor signed into law Section 509.102 of the Florida statutes, which basically, and I'll go into that a little bit, but basically this ordinance is an attempt to be consistent with that particular statute. And the second reason is why we're here is because recently, over the last year and a half, we've been getting a lot of inquiries from developers and investors wanting to do things such as a food truck court, things such as a brewery. And I don't know if you know, board members, but nowadays, breweries and food trucks, they kind of almost go hand in hand. And we've also received an inquiry from these lovely folks that you see behind you today, the Galbraiths, who own Casual Bird. Is the new restaurant at 109 Belmont Boulevard, and they're hoping to open in the middle, I believe, November 12th or so? 16th. November 16th. And they want to utilize this particular ordinance and allow them to have a food truck on the backside of their property and basically complement the restaurant that they have. But I'll get into that a little bit later. So one thing I want to make mention of, board members, is that if this ordinance is approved by the City of Daytona Beach Shores, any food truck activity that's sponsored by the city would be exempt from these regulations, with the exception of life safety issues. So they'll still be inspected by Public Safety Department and other departments if necessary. And the reason for that is because we want to allow the city to have the flexibility to do things to make its events successful. So again, just quickly the background, the statute that I referenced earlier, there's 3 important points. And the first is that the city and local governments in general here in the state of Florida are preempted by the state in terms of requiring any kind of licenses, registration fees, permits, or whatever have you when it comes to food truck operations in the shores, or in the cities or local governments. So what that means is that a food truck essentially, if they meet all the requirements of the local government, they're not required to have a permit. There's no permit process. So and that's something tricky, but thankfully there's a subsection 3 there that I'm going to get into in a little bit that allows us to have some regulatory authority. So the second point that I want to make out is that the local governments, according to the statutes, they're not allowed to have or to prohibit these food trucks or mobile food vehicles prohibited from within their local government. So in other words, you can't out-zone them or you can't zone them out. You have to have some area in town where these vehicles can operate, and if you don't, then you're going to be contravening the statute. The third point is that despite all of that, there is good news, and I'll just read it off the overhead. It basically says, this section may not be construed to affect a municipality, county, or other local government entity's authority to regulate the operation of mobile food dispensing vehicles other than the regulations described in section 2 above. So what that means is that as long as you don't require them to have a permit or any kind of license or whatever have you to operate in the city, and as long as you have an area where they can actually operate, you can exert your other regulatory authority that you have, such as police powers and obviously zoning regulations. So that is the reason why we're here today. So just key points with regards to the regulation. The vehicles may operate solely on commercial and hotel properties with a valid development agreement, and 2, on construction sites with a valid site plan development order. So when it comes to construction sites, having a commercial plaza or a building with a plumbing permit or something like that wouldn't count. As you'll see in the ordinance, it has to be consistent with section 5-14 of the code, which basically says there has to be an approved site plan development order. So the Max Daytona, for example, they have a site plan development order, and that's a construction site. The Oceans 25, they have a site plan development order, that's a construction site. But if somebody pulled out a renovation permit for a house or for a commercial plaza or whatever have you, under this proposed ordinance, those are not considered construction sites because they don't have a site plan development order that was associated with that. So the hours of operation would be from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., and that's consistent with our outdoor dining regulations. However, on construction sites, it would be limited from 7 to 7:30. 7 a.m. to 7:30 p.m., and that's consistent with the traditional hours for hours of operation for construction sites.
3:30.
So in addition, these vehicles have to be at least 50 feet from residential properties. They're prohibited from selling or dispensing alcohol from the vehicle. There's also a prohibition against emitting any kind of deleterious substance that would impact the environment or neighbors. You may recall that when we had a test case at the Papas Plaza, I think it was like maybe the same day it went out there for the first time, we were getting complaints from people because there was a smoke and ash and everything bellowing all over the place. So this will have to prevent food trucks and food dispensing vehicles of that nature from operating within the city. And then, of course, there was going to be an initial and biannual inspections by the Public Safety Department, and it's also subject to, they would also be subject to inspections from other relevant departments at their discretion, such as code enforcement or the building department. Those are the key points. Of course, there's other things in there as well. So in terms of the Florida statute, this ordinance, we believe, is consistent with the statute that was referenced earlier. I mean, it provides an area where these vehicles can operate within the city, and we don't require a permit for doing so, as you'll see in the ordinance. And then, of course, it is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So in terms of the actual impact, you know, there are, as I mentioned earlier, there's 2 active construction sites, and there's 4 commercial hotel properties with active development agreements. And if anyone's curious, Publix is one of them, and we know Publix more likely will not have one there because it's going to be competing with their deli. The other ones is the Volusia County Depot, which is on Dunlawton Boulevard, right next to Genovese's, and we know they're not going to do one there as well. The other one is 109 Dunlawton, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on the other item. And we know that they do want to have one there. And the fourth and final one is our favorite property in the Shores, Treasure Island. So essentially, we know that there's probably not going to be a proliferation of these vehicles all over town. And the other thing in terms of land use impact, again, is a 50-foot setback from residential properties and the prohibition of smoke, ash, and other things like that. So when staff drafted this ordinance, along with the city attorney, we considered the public safety, health, and welfare, and we were also conscientious about the economic value of the existing brick and mortar restaurants and public food establishments that we have in the city. In other words, we didn't want to just open the floodgates in such a way that it impact, you know, some of the historical venues, or not venues, but the historical public food establishments that we have here in the Shores. So with that said, staff is recommending approval. If there's any questions for staff, I'll be happy to take those.
I don't have a comment, I just have a comment, okay? Last weekend, we had a situation whereby a truck pulled up and set up shop, okay? And code enforcement got involved, and they said that that was not legal. Correct. Is this gonna affect that?
This would not affect that necessarily. John, if you want to chime in, you're more than welcome to do so. With this ordinance, that site would still not be eligible to have a public mobile food vehicle there. So it would still be a code enforcement.
No idea. Where was that, Chuck?
You know where Burger King is?
Oh, yeah.
Right before Burger King, there's like a mini mall there.
Yeah.
The end is an empty store lot. Well, a
Surfside
trailer
Tavern.
parked in there and started selling steak and.
So I don't want to get off on a tangent on that, but that was illegal, and the property owner has been notified, and we have discovered that the property owner did not even know. So it was actually one of the tenants, I'm going to let you guys guess who it was, that basically did it without the property owner's authorization. And so, you know, they're trying to rectify their differences on that issue. Because ultimately, it is the property owner that will be before the special magistrate in a code enforcement hearing.
Can these locations be leased out to other people who don't own the property? You follow me what I'm saying?
No.
I get approval to do this at this location, then gonna go find somebody to come in and do it rather than me do it?
So it doesn't have to be, the ordinance doesn't speak to who would operate the vehicle. You know, typically the way this works is you hire, you know, there's clearing houses, if you want to call it that, for food trucks. You know, I know there's a large one in Orlando. You know, call these guys, and what they do is they find a match for you in terms of the food truck that you want to have on for your event.
So, you answer my question.
What's the, excuse me, the definition of a mobile vehicle? I mean, sometimes it says truck, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, is it anything with a wheel on it?
It's actually a self-propelled mobile public food establishment. And so the definition that you see in the ordinance is essentially almost the same or identical to, with the exception of a few things, as the Florida statute's definition of a mobile food dispensing vehicle. So basically, it could be a food trailer. Let me see if I have a
This is not self-propelled.
This is one. Actually got this from Ms. Galbraith, but this is an example. I think everybody's seen a food truck before, but it also includes, and under the statutory definition, if I'm correct, it could be a trailer as well that can be pulled, by another vehicle.
So like when you think of hot dog carts in New York,
No, those are actually, you mean the little small ones?
Yeah, it's
those
got
are
wheels on it.
covered- Those are actually covered under a different statute. They don't fall under this statute.
okay?
And under the definition that we've kind of borrowed from the Florida statute.
So I have another question. Oh, go ahead, Tony.
question. I think, I'm not against this application, but I think we have to be careful here in the shores because it could be opening up a can of worms that all these trucks will start coming in. Excuse me, what Chuck noticed going on there, the word gets out. So it's just something that we have to keep an eye on.
That's correct. And we've had code enforcement look at this particular ordinance, and public safety has looked at this ordinance, and, we've come up with what we believe is the best solution within the regulatory authority that the city has. As I mentioned earlier, every site in the city, every property in the city will not be able to do this. It's only properties, commercial or hotel properties, that have a development agreement with the city that would be able to do this, or construction sites that have a valid development, site plan development order. So if there's a property that's demoed and then there's a new condo or hotel going up there, that's legally considered under the city's code as a construction site. So any other construction site where somebody's just pulling an electrical permit or whatever have you, they won't be able to do this. Any other commercial or hotel property that doesn't have a development agreement that's approved by the city council under the recommendation of the planning and zoning board would not be able to do it as well. But regardless of whether we have this ordinance or not, there is a possibility that somebody can come in like what they did over the weekend, and that's when our code enforcement has to be on top of the property owners for that.
Thank you. This doesn't address parking, number of spaces, or bathrooms.
Correct. So the ordinance does speak to bathroom requirements that's required for ADA purposes, accessibility, and it also covers what's called required use elements under the city's land development code. So for example, if you're required to have 10 parking spaces and now you're throwing in a food truck that's going to generate additional usage, then that's an issue. And you can't park in a required parking space, you can't park in a driveway, you can't park anywhere where the code requires you to have certain elements.
About the bathroom issue.
The bathroom issue, so there is a formula that the building department utilizes to determine whether or not bathrooms are needed and how many are needed, and the ordinance does speak to that. So whenever these things come in, there's going to be inspection by, as I mentioned, initial and then biannual inspection by the public safety department, and our guys in the building department, they're everywhere, as you probably know. Once we get word of that, again, because we can't require them to have a permit to operate in the city, once we know that they've done one, and if we haven't known that they've done one, then public safety department will contact the building department, and we'll go out there and do an inspection. The ordinance allows us to go ahead and do inspections of the building department at our discretion, and we'll just ensure that they have all those things that are necessary, not only by the city's code, but also by the Florida Building Code and ADA as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So at Bike Week or whatever, not everybody's going to have a place outside and all that.
No, they should not. Well, let me just clarify that. So in the city of Daytona Beach Shores, through a special events permit, in which I believe it's a 60-day notice you have to give the city council. With a special events permit, meaning you have 50 or more participants there, you're anticipating 50 or more participants, any commercial property or hotel property can petition the city council outside of this ordinance to have tents, balloons, food trucks, or whatever have you. So that's another way a food truck can legally operate within the city of Daytona Beach Shores. But this ordinance specifically, attempts to ensure that the statutory requirements by the state, are met with regards to allowing these things in the city at certain locations.
Thank you, Stuart.
You're welcome.
If I may ask, since we're so close to Port Orange, especially near the bridge, near the establishment that they're going to be doing, what is Port Orange's you know, how is their ruling on this? Because there's a new microbrewery that just opened up. There's DJ's Deck that doesn't have a kitchen, and they might consider doing food trucks. I just want to know, how do they differ from us?
So I'm not extremely familiar with the city of Port Orange or any other local governments, regulations with regards to food trucks, but I do know someone that works there, and that person has told me that they're not allowed unless they're allowed through a special events permit. That would have to go before the council as well.
Stuart, is there any type of parking regulation? In other words, can this stay on a property overnight?
No.
Permanently?
No.
It has to move every day?
Correct. Well, actually, I'm sorry. Operation is restricted in terms of time.
Right, but
in
the
terms of
actual-
keeping it there, the ordinance does not speak to that.
So the vehicle could sit there for the rest of the time?
It can, yes, it can. It can. And the reason for that is because, sometimes these food trucks, there's two things there. First, you can do, as Mr. Lilly was saying, getting a contractor to come into your site for a special event. And those types of vehicles, they typically go back and forth, whatever, because they typically have to go to a commissary, or some other place where they go and refuel and get, supplies and whatever have you. And those are typically housed somewhere else. Then there's the other type of food truck or mobile food vehicles, such as the food trailers, where they're actually parked on the site for an extended period of time, and those don't require a commissary. So under this ordinance, there's no prohibition in terms of keeping them overnight. But the operation, though, which would obviously be the issue, is what is governed under this ordinance. So, for example, they can't go or can't operate beyond 10 o'clock at night, and they can't start before 7 o'clock at night on regular properties.
And as far as the 109 property, and maybe the applicant wants to talk about this, but it seems to me we had a lot of discussion on their amount of parking and all that the first time around when the restaurant was going up. And I don't see where that's going to be able to park a vehicle and not take up a space or interfere with some of the parking.
Yeah, under the special exception, I'll speak to that. I'll speak to that because this is a separate issue, so to speak. But what I can tell you, just as a precursor, it's not going to take up a parking spot. They actually have a location, and I have that in an exhibit that I'm going to show you guys where that's going to go.
Behind the bike rack.
You read the staff report.
Oh, but the only place I could figure out to put it on that lot.
Yes, it's definitely in that vicinity. It's just offset on that, and I'll show you that under the next item on the agenda.
And my only other question is, we say that it's got to be where we're going to take it into account with competing existing restaurants. And I realize that it's across the street and it therefore qualifies as Port Orange, but in a way it kind of competes with Dairy Bar, who's been drawing beach traffic for some time, walking traffic to.
Are you saying that's a good thing?
Well, I'm saying you're going to be in competition.
Port Orange.
I'm saying you're in competition now with brick and mortar.
Yeah, and I'm sure the applicant for the special exception for the mural will speak to that. They have a better command of that. I'm not a business person. But from my perspective, when we drafted this ordinance, we wanted to protect Daytona Beach Shore's businesses.
But if I'm right, when we do the mural, it's only about the mural.
It's
This
about
will be
the
a
mural,
foregone
but
conclusion.
It is about the mural because, and again, we're kind of getting ahead. So is it appropriate for me to? Okay.
You can mention it, but don't get into.
No, I just didn't see where the mural and the food truck were interrelated, so I'm trying to separate them.
I'll leave the experts to speak to that when we get to that subject.
I meant for approving it.
For approving this ordinance?
And the mural ordinance. I'm not seeing where they're not two totally separate deals. So if I approve this now, I've approved the food truck.
Oh, no. Oh.
If I approve the mural later, I've only approved the mural, not the food truck parking or any of that.
These are two separate items, but conceptually, the way they would interact is a complementary concept that was proposed by the property owner.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, basically, that's my question. Any other questions?
I just want to say one thing. The city is very good at controlling everything and keeping this city wonderful and beautiful. So can I say I don't see that there's a big problem with having a food truck. That's a beautiful food truck, by the way, that we saw in the picture. Anyway, that's my comment.
The one we saw wasn't the one under consideration.
So so I actually emailed Ms. Galbraith, was it yesterday? Yesterday, because she had given, when they came up with this whole idea about the mural and about the food truck kind of coexisting together, she gave some different concepts as to what she was thinking about. And so I emailed her yesterday to see whether or not the concept had evolved or not, and have something obviously to show you guys. I wanted to use the most recent concept that she had, and this is what was sent to us.
It's nice. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Any motion?
I move to recommend approval of ordinance 2021-14 as presented.
I second it.
Jerry, would you take the call?
Yes, sir. Mr. Horian?
Yes.
Ms. Tornatori?
Yes.
Mr. Delange?
Yes.
Mr. Lilly?
Yeah.
Mr. Schmitz?
Yes.
All right, I was trying to microwave this hearing, to use somebody's term earlier.
Put it in the toaster oven. It'll go longer. All right, the next item is a quasi-judicial hearing. And that is for a special exception. Attorney Carey, can I have you read that ordinance, please?
This is
Oh, that's not an ordinance, you're right. It's a special exception 1202-1019 for the Casual Bird Restaurant mural. And I think it's Stuart's turn again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Board members, for the record, my name is Stuart Cruz, City Planner with the City of Daytona Beach Shores. John, do you need to swear anyone in?
Yes, is there going to be anybody other than you testifying?
Probably.
Okay. Anybody who's going to be speaking on this matter, please stand up and raise your right hand. In this proceeding, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this one is a little bit tricky because there's different things in there, and I'll try to explain it as clearly as possible. The first is that the application is actually from the property owner, which is Pax Tecum LLC, located at 101 Dunlawton Boulevard. 101 Dunlawton Boulevard, as you all know, is where the Ocean's Edge Veterinary Clinic is located, and it's owned by Dr. LeMay, who has been in the city for many years. As the property owner, because that's where the mural is proposed to go on her wall, on her property, she's the one who actually had to make the application under the law. That's the first confusing thing. So some of the things that I'm going to say relate to the 101 property, but then I'll get into the 109 property. So the location is 101 Dunlawton Boulevard, as I mentioned earlier. The property is almost half an acre. The zoning is retail service commercial district, detached district, which is GC2. And the current land use is for retail commercial and the veterinary clinic, as everyone knows. So the reason behind this application is because the adjacent property owner to the east, which is at 109 Dunlawton Boulevard, will be having the Coastal Bird Restaurant. Actually, as you know, there was a development agreement approved between the city and the owners, which is 109 LLC. And the use for that property is going to be a restaurant named Casual Bird Restaurant. And the property owners approached me some time ago, and they came up with a concept in which they wanted to have a food truck on the property to sell gelato to complement their business, but they also wanted to be able to complement their business on social media through the establishment of a mural in the background. So the thought is that the mural is going to be on the back of Dr. LeMay's wall, which is the east-facing wall, and that's going to be the backdrop for the food truck. And in that vicinity, it's going to create a little environment where they can where customers can take pictures and they can post on Instagram and all these other social media platforms. And that's essentially the reason why we're here today. And the specific request is to allow the property owner to paint an 11 by 25 mural on the east-facing wall of the property at 101 Dunlawton Boulevard, pursuant to the special exception regulations with regards to mural here in Daytona Beach Shores. So this is a location view of the property. It's about almost 3 miles, I would say, from the city. I mean, actually from where we are today at the community center on Dunlawton Boulevard. This is an aerial view of the property. You can see the special exception site I have right here. This is the 101 Dunlawton property, and right next door is the Casual Bird property. And the Casual Bird and veterinary clinic are on the opposite side, the north side of Dunlawton Boulevard. And on the south side, as you can see, is Starbucks and Genovese Plaza. So this is a street view from Dunlawton of the Ocean's Edge Veterinary Clinic. But you can see also next door is the Casual Bird restaurant. November 16th, opening. And so this is a mural location plan, if you want to call it that, of the site. So the red, what you see there, that's the Ocean's Veterinary Clinic building. You can see over here, this is the Casual Bird property. And the yellow area here is more or less where the mural will be located. And in green right here, you can see in this grassy area, inside of the sidewalk is where the food truck or the food trailer would go, the mobile food vehicle would go. So you can see it's not going to be taking up any parking spaces. It's not going to be in any required use element on the site. So it's not going to be creating an issue, essentially, from staff's perspective on site. So this is a street view. So I actually drove out there one day, parked the vehicle on the site, and I went out by the sign and I took a picture. So typically with murals, they're used to convey a particular image or attitude or concept or culture within a local government. And sometimes they could be a little bit outlandish. Sometimes they fit right in. But people always are concerned about traffic and about how is it going to impact passersby. So I said, let me go and take a particular perspective and see what it would look like if I were driving by or walking by. And this is the approximate location of what you'd see. So it actually would not go all the way to the north end of the wall. It would only be, as I mentioned earlier, 11 by 25. So this is a, I don't know if you want to call it a rendering, but this is an exhibit that was provided by the applicant, and the mural was actually generated by a muralist. I didn't even know that was a thing, but there is a local muralist, and apparently she's very good, and they have contracted with this muralist, and this is what the mural is going to look like. Originally, the mural had text in it, but the text had to be taken out because under the city's definition of a mural, text is not allowed. Because the whole idea with the code is that the code wants to keep advertising separate from a mural, which is an art expression for the most part. And so again, the actual food truck is going to be generally in this vicinity here on the grass. And the mural is going to be like the backdrop, and they're supposed to basically be some sort of a symbiotic relationship in which they complement each other for the social media and in this digital age. So I'm not going to get into all the special exception authorization criteria. Those are in your staff report, but essentially, in staff's opinion, all 27 requirements. 28 requirements of the city's land development code in section 1463 and 1458 that relate to murals and special exceptions. We believe that all those are met. So things in terms of the size, they're limited to 30% of the wall face, for example. This is only going to be about 17%, I believe. Things in terms of getting a qualified muralist, an artist to paint and to maintain it, the property owner has attested that that will be the case. Just things of that nature. And then additionally, things such as traffic generation, because in some cases, again, because of the nature of the mural, if it's on a major thoroughfare, for example, and it's quite visible, it could create an issue because people, obviously, they want to slow down and look at the mural and and understand or appreciate it. In this case, as I showed earlier, it's going to be partially visible and not completely visible. And to be honest, I think most of us drive at that intersection all the time, and the only thing that we're focusing on is getting over the bridge. So to be honest, I mean, I don't know if necessarily it's a good thing or not for the business owners, but I know that from my experience, it's probably not going to, and professional experience, it's not going to generate a lot of traffic. So as part of a special exception process, there's due public notice requirements in the city's code, and all those have been met. Staff is recommending approval as presented. If there's any questions for me, I'll be happy to take those.
Are there any questions for
And the
Stuart?
property owner is here, of course, if anybody had any questions about it.
Just to be consistent, because I recall that when there was another mural in the city that we had to approve was the palm tree in that hotel. And we really made sure that the maintenance clause was in there. And I do notice that it said paint it and maintain. Can you elaborate what maintain is? Because I know we had question about the other mural where the hurricane comes, and I think we even put as a city that if it's not maintained, the city would take over for the maintenance. And I
Yes,
was
and-
wondering, just to be consistent, if we can.
Correct. And that's a good point, and the city, the Planning and Zoning Board can make a recommendation with regards to the maintenance element of this approval. And I will leave that part up to John whenever we get there, if there is a motion to such an extent. But at this point, if there's no other questions for me, I can ask the property owner to come up and speak to that maintenance concern that you have.
Are there any other questions for Stuart before we proceed?
Thank you.
Okay, we can have an applicant presentation, which we, as a board, hold to 3 minutes, just like the city council policies.
Thank you, Brendan Galbraith, owner of 109 Dunlop. Muralist provided us some information on the clear coat. She believes she knows it's the same product that Disney uses for their murals and whatnot. I assume, and most of us assume that Disney maintains a really good property. So I have the product information here. I don't know if you want it, but what I proposed, because I did have to fill out a maintenance plan on the special exception application, I believe, we proposed a 2-year revisit from the muralist to eyeball, to touch up, at her discretion, and then, but this, is proposing a 10-year life, but we're going to propose a 2-year visit back from her, which I think is reasonable. It does face east. I believe the building has an eave on it. I'd have to go double check. It's going to be out of the sun by 11 a.m. in the morning, most every morning, maybe noon at the latest on certain times of the year. But it's not going to have the heaviest sun. It's going to be mostly shaded during the heaviest part of the days. Summertime days, which get that sun blasting in the later afternoon. So it's going to be heavily shaded. So I'm confident that it's going to be in the best position to be successful from a maintenance standpoint. The other comment, when you took that picture, the food truck was certainly not in place. So I believe it might be more blocked from the road than we see in that photo, because the food truck would actually kind of, maybe cut that corner a little bit as far as the sight lines. So you might not even see the mural potentially from Dunlop. I can't guarantee that, but that's just a thought when you show that picture, because our concept is, again, to complement the business. At the end of the day, the building's small. We don't have the capacity to provide ice cream service or gelato service within our, I think it's 1,200 square feet, or maybe a little bit less than that. But so we believe that it's certainly a compliment, but it is absolutely an opportunity to make a destination. I mean, Instagram these days and what all these kids do, and I don't know if you got kids or grandkids that do all that stuff, but it's amazing when you go to a certain spot. So somebody has to show up just to see the mural, take a picture, and the wings and the land are a good example. Yeah. I've been on vacation with my daughter, and we walked 25 blocks in San Francisco one time to take a picture in front of a neon sign, and it's nutty, but that's just what they do. But at the end of the day, that's our goal, is to create, a complement to our business that is a draw to the property. And when people come to the Daytona Beach area, they want to come to that property to take a picture and to see and touch and feel themselves. So that's our goal. From a parking standpoint, talk about the stuff under the bridge. I'm actually going to a meeting. I was invited to a 10 o'clock meeting tomorrow morning at the brewery tomorrow, just to kind of be one of the speakers about why are we investing over there. Since Starbucks went in, you're seeing a lot of people walk that strip. I run that block most every morning, and you see people with cups of coffee walking back to Pirates Cove. You're starting to generate more walk traffic, and I don't know that it's going to necessarily there's always going to be parking issues at a busy place. That's a goal. As an owner of a property, that's a goal. I want a parking problem. But I think what you're seeing happen with that stuff under the bridge is you're creating more walk traffic from the condos, from Pirates Cove, and probably within that 2 to 3 block radius, potentially from the pier to a little bit north of Dunlawton. Those folks are walking to Starbucks. They're hopefully going to walk to Casual Bird, and hopefully they're going to walk under the bridge. So the competition concept is this is a growing area. You need services. 2 ice cream shops makes all the sense in the world. I mean, we got a big 17,000 square foot restaurant going across from Catfish. Port Orange didn't shut it down because Catfish was there. It's the nature of a growing area is you need services and places to go, and you want that. I think that's what a city wants. So I believe it's all positive, but that's just my perspective as the guy that has to make the payment every month. So that's where I'm at. So I'd be happy to take any questions if you want.
Any questions? No. I have one question, I guess. I don't know whether it's for the applicant or Stuart. Thinking about that, if you're going to park it on the grass, probably going to kill the grass or something. Anyway, does it affect the landscaping requirement of how much of the plot is landscaped? No. Okay.
If it was taking down trees or some sort of a...
But not necessarily green area?
Yes. So if he was taking down trees or shrubs that were used for buffering that's required by the code under landscape requirements, then that would be an issue, but that's not the case.
Okay, thank you.
If I may,
Yes.
a question. As I recall, when we first approved this property, there was a rental individual upstairs, and they said that he would have a parking on that right there in front of the Muras where his parking and the entrance to the upstairs residency. Is that still, are you still going to rent that apartment upstairs?
It's been rented the whole 2 years that we've owned the building. There's a single parking space facing that wall to the south of the dumpsters. The site plan's completed. I believe we're 2 or 3 at minimum over the code requirement. We're not at code. We're above code for your requirements.
But that individual's parking space is one of those.
We have not put a sign up. Of course, if they, one of the individuals will actually be a manager in the building, so it's a little bit of a 2-for-1 there. The car's not going to move, but it's going to be the top and the bottom, which is a nice little benefit. So that's going to go a little bit. But we have not identified a apartment-only space. If that's a residence-only, we haven't gone there yet. Yeah.
There is an employee-only spot
There is an employee-only spot, yes, but not an apartment-only spot.
and a compact car-only spot.
Exactly.
All right, any other comments? In that case, for the record, there's no public input in favor or opposed to this. So we will close the hearing. Any discussion by board members before we call for a vote? No. Seeing no discussion, Sherry, would you take the roll? Oh, we need a motion, I'm sorry.
I'll move to approve special exception SPEX 12021-019, option 2 as presented.
Second.
Sherry, would you take the roll now?
Yes, sir. Mr. Delange?
Yes.
Mr. Horian?
Yes.
Mr. Lilly?
Yes.
Ms. Tornatori?
Yes.
Mr. Schmitz?
Yes. The next item is Attorney Terry going to give us some input on what Florida gets to do to cities and counties once again.
So, you requested a briefing last month, and I think you're doing it this month. So, I've included the Florida League of Cities bill summaries for all of the bills that passed the last session that they believe impact local government. I'm not going to talk about each one of them. You can read through them out of the packet if you like, but I will talk about the ones that specifically deal with what we do with planning and zoning. So the first one, and they've handily divided them up into sections. So the ones that we're going to start with are on page 5 of their packet, which is page 63 of the big packet. And the first bill dealing with land use is the government or action protecting private property rights. And what this is an amendment to the Burke-Harris Act. You all may be familiar with the Burt Harris Act, and essentially it provides that if the local government makes a land use regulation that negatively impacts the investment-backed expectations of the landowner, that the landowner can then sue the local government for damages. It doesn't allow them to prevent the regulation from going into effect, but it would require the city to pay them based on the judge's determination of damages caused by the land development regulation. And this is a law that's been in effect, gosh, 30 years now. A lot of people still don't know about it, but it's been around for a generation at least. This bill essentially expands the definition of real property to include subsurface and mineral estates, which probably isn't a big deal for a city like Shores because I don't think we really have any minerals underground that anybody would be finding on a barrier island. But for some inland cities and counties, that might be a big deal. It also requires the government to respond to claims now in 90 days. It used to give the government 150 days, so it's telling the government basically you have to have a response to the Burt Harris Act claim within about 3 months. And that does give the local government the opportunity to either amend the ordinance to reduce or eliminate the claim, or to essentially say, we believe this regulation is valid, and we're either willing to pay the damages or don't believe the damages are caused by this, and then go to court after that. And it also, and probably most importantly, provides that a property owner now doesn't have to actually make an application and get denied in order to avail themselves of the Burt Harris Act if the application would be completely futile. If the government basically acknowledges, well, you can apply for this, but you'll get denied because the code prohibits this type of application. Before this bill went into effect, you would still have to pay to apply, get your studies to support your application, et cetera. And that could cost in the thousands of dollars depending on the kind of application it is. And the legislature is basically saying if the application would be futile, as in the government has no discretion to approve or deny it, then they can just go straight into the Burt Harris Act claim without having to formally make the application. And that was House Bill 421. And the next one is House Bill 59, which is called growth management. But essentially, this is the private property rights element, the comp plan bill. And this bill requires all local governments to pass a private property rights element to the comp plan, which you did recently. And that's why we did it. Because the legislature is going to require any local government to do that, and they won't approve comp plan amendments from residents or businesses if you don't have this on the books. The private property rights element itself is fairly benign. It really restates current law. It restates the law as it existed before, before this bill passed. It's basically saying, well, you're going to explicitly include this in your comp plan so that residents are aware that this is, that the city values private property rights, essentially. And so we have already complied with that. That has gone out to, that's sent up to the state and the county for their review?
Yes, they're currently reviewing it.
Okay, so that has been sent out to the state and county. A comp plan amendment essentially, it comes here to the planning board, then it goes to the city council for first reading, then it is transmitted to the county and the state, and they review it concurrently. It doesn't have to go to one then the other. And once both of them approve it, it comes back to the council for second reading. And that process usually takes a few months. So we are waiting on the review from the county and the state. Once it's provided, it'll go back to the council for second reading, and then it will become on the top line. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. The third bill is House Bill 403, which is home-based businesses. Essentially, this prohibits the local government from regulating home-based businesses to the extent that they meet a lot of criteria. It's not the Wild West, with home-based businesses with this bill, because there are a bunch of criteria to make sure that if it's a residential use, the use will still essentially be primarily residential. But some cities, have very restrictive home-based business rules that basically prohibit people from operating businesses out of their home, even if it's just, them doing something that's completely unobtrusive. And this bill would prevent regulations to that effect. Some of the criteria that I mentioned are essentially the employees must reside in the building. You can have one or two people who come to the building, which is your house, from off-site, but the resident must be the one operating the business. You can't lease out your house to somebody else to operate a business out of it. They still have to be subject to parking, and the need for parking can't be greater in volume than would normally be expected as a residence. So, you're not going to be allowed to have parking overflowing out, in the street for a block because of your home-based business. It would have to be, essentially the parking that you would have normally at a residence. And again, the idea is there's no more than one or two other people other than the resident that would be coming to the business generally. The local government can still regulate the use of vehicles or trailers, and the local government can regulate the parking and storage of heavy equipment that's visible from the street or neighboring property. From the view of the street, the use must be consistent with uses of residential areas. So you can't look at it and say, oh, there's a business operating here. If you can visibly see that there's a business being operated there, then the city could regulate it and shut it down. Essentially, the idea here is if you run a bakery out of your house, and sell it off-site but want to use your house to make the food, you could do that kind of thing. Retail transactions may not be conducted at a structure other than the dwelling itself. So, you could have somebody coming to the door, picking something up and leaving, but you can't have like a booth, outside of the house. The business activity must be secondary to the property's use of the residence. So this doesn't open the door for you to basically convert any residence into an office. You have to actually, live there and that be your primary home, and then operate the business out of there. And you must comply with relevant local or state regulations regarding signage, equipment, and any processes that contain noise, odors, or similar external impacts. You can still, you can still enforce health, safety, welfare regulations. The local regulations about external impacts may not be more stringent than apply to a residence where no business is conducted, which kind of makes sense. If you're allowed 80 decibels of noise at a residence, you can't say the business can only operate with 60 decibels of noise, whatever. That's the idea there. So that they can't treat the business residents worse than the resident residents. Hazardous materials can obviously be regulated, and it provides a framework for challenging the local government.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Being that we're a lot of condominiums
The
up and down the strip,
condominiums,
and a lot of condominiums have the rules and regulations doesn't allow businesses inside the condo.
Correct.
Does the state law trump that?
No, the condo association still can regulate inside the condominium. This is really geared towards the single family.
Drink it.
Okay, like off the peninsula. Yeah, so this doesn't reach into the condo board rules at all. There's an impact fee bill I'm really not going to talk about because it's really not relevant to us here. And the next bill is 487. which is small-scale development amendments. And essentially what this bill does is increases maximum acreage of a small-scale comp plan amendment from 10 acres to 50 acres. So the distinction between a small-scale and a large-scale comp plan amendment is essentially that we can make a small-scale amendment without going to the state for approval. And the amount of acreage is increasing consistently. I don't know how many parcels in the city that we have that are over 50 acres. Do you?
That would be the whole city.
Zero.
So, so basically, I think this would make the entire city small-scale amendment so that, so it means you can amend the comp plan a little bit easier.
You gotta be kidding.
And there's one more bill outside of the context of planning and zoning board that I just wanted to touch on so that you're all aware of it, because it may be something that you should know. For code enforcement, and we don't have a board, we have a special magistrate for code enforcement, but there was a bill that passed that requires you to provide your name and address to local government if you would like to make a complaint. So they're probably trying to do away with the idea of anonymous complaints. And so the code enforcement, it wouldn't prevent the code enforcement officer from starting a case on their own volition. It may present some troubles for the code enforcement officer, though, if there's an anonymous complaint and they go and start a case on their own volition, proving essentially, well, no, what, I started this case because I drove by it and saw the violation versus I'm reacting to an anonymous complaint. So, that'll be something that Gwen will have to work through as she's, doing her job, but we've discussed it. So far, it hasn't been a problem. Well, it could be at some point for her, but, that's outside the scope of this board, but I thought you'd all like to be in there. And on the tail end of this, I'd just like to make one more comment. A couple of you have made, public statements to the board of the city council regarding matters that have come before this board. And I'd just like to caution you, anything that could become an issue before this board, you should avoid making a public statement of your opinion, essentially, because that could have the result of prejudicing you and somebody demanding your recusal if it sounds like you've already got your mind made up before hearing the evidence in a quasi-judicial procedure. So, so I'd just encourage you to, my preference would be you didn't talk to the board at all about matters that involve this board. If you want to talk to the city council people privately, you can do that. There's nothing that would prohibit you from doing that. But when you put your opinion out there in public, it could cause some problems if the matter comes before this board again, which they sometimes do.
Sometimes I choose not to even go to the city council meetings because I don't want to be influenced. I want the influence to come from here.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the best practice, but I wouldn't, tell
No, I know.
you
I
shouldn't
just-
go to the city council meeting.
it's me.
I would say you shouldn't go to the city council meeting and take, let your opinion be known publicly on a matter. You should let your opinion speak through this board.
Exactly.
So, because in this board, in this forum, you're doing so based on evidence that you've heard on the record, which is how it's supposed to work.
Thank you.
Any questions?
No question.
Why did we have a list of the bills that failed?
Just
out of curiosity.
The league includes that because bills that fail often come back the next session. So
To haunt you.
they want you to be aware of
Right,
these are the
Stuart.
issues that are percolating. Often with bills that pass, there are several sessions in the works as they get amended and improved to try to get enough members' support to vote on them and approve them. So very rarely do you have a bill that pops up one year and passes and becomes law that year. Most often, they fail, then the environment is right and they pass. The
of our
property
proceedings.
rights element bill has come up how many sessions?
Can't remember.
For years and years and years. So these are the things that didn't pass this session, so they're not law, but they may
on the
come up
horizon.
again next session, and they may pass then.
Bill B. Bach.
Thank you for the update.
Certainly.
Yes, it was good. Thank you. It's always good to see what the state tries to do to us. Well, it's not as bad as what the feds try to do to us, so. Are there any comments by the board other than that? Nope, in that case, we're adjourned.
Oh,
Oops.
Stuart, going back to the food trucks, trailers, you said that if they're on a piece of property that has some type of agreement with the city, what was it?
Development agreement.
And how long is that in for, until the development is done, or?
So usually there's a time period, a duration associated with it, and usually it's 30 years. That's their standard.
30 years?
Yes.
I got a food truck for 30 years?
It doesn't mean that they have to have it there. The development agreement itself that qualifies the property typically is for 30 years. And that's based on the city's code for development agreements.
Holy,
But when the city approves the development agreement, it doesn't have to be for 30 years. 30 years is the max.
so but basically, they have a food truck there for 30 years.
If the city council approves the development for 30 years, yes.
Whoa.
Why do you think I was asking where I was gonna park every night?
We did close, right? We did, now do we have to close again?
Development agreements do come before the board as well. So
I was thinking, if they had a development
Burger
going
King
on.
is still